What happens when a homeowners association president crosses the line, bringing fake security to a family's doorstep, only to be stopped in her tracks when the wife comes home in her Navy uniform? Bang, bang, bang. The sound on the door wasn't polite. It was sharp, like someone demanding entry rather than asking to speak. Inside their two-story brick home on a quiet street in Plano, Texas, Marcus Johnson froze for a second in the living room. His wife, Danielle, was still at work, serving her last day of duty before the weekend. Their 7-year-old daughter was upstairs, reading in her room. He wasn't expecting anyone. When Marcus pulled back the blinds, he saw 3 figures on the porch. One woman in a fitted blazer, her arms crossed like she owned the place. Beside her, 2 men in dark jackets with the word security stitched on, but no badges, no names, no official gear. They stood tall, hands on their belts, giving off the kind of presence meant to intimidate. Marcus opened the door halfway. "Can I help you?" His voice was calm, though his heart was already picking up speed. The woman leaned forward, her tone sharp. "Mr. Johnson, I'm Linda Sorensen, president of the Homeowners Association. These are enforcement officers. We've received multiple complaints about your property. I'm here to inform you that your family is in violation of community standards. You'll need to make arrangements to leave." Marcus blinked. "Excuse me, leave?" "Yeah," Linda said quickly, as if she'd rehearsed the words. "The HOA has rules, and those rules are non-negotiable." Behind her, one of the so-called enforcers adjusted his jacket, shifting his weight like he was ready for confrontation. Marcus kept his hand firmly on the door. "With all due respect, I've lived here a year. I've paid every HOA fee on time. I've followed the guidelines." "What exactly are you talking about?" Linda smirked, eyes narrowing. "Unapproved modifications, excessive noise, and your lawn doesn't meet community standards. Don't play coy, Mr. Johnson. The rules exist for a reason. This neighborhood has a reputation to protect." Marcus felt heat rise in his chest. The lawn was trimmed just last week. Noise? The loudest thing in his house was his daughter's laughter. This wasn't about grass or noise, he could feel it. The enforcer to Linda's right stepped forward, his boots heavy on the porch. "Best not to argue, sir. Just do what's asked." Marcus took a breath, steadying himself. "Show me the paperwork. Show me the official violation notice. Otherwise, this conversation is over." Linda's smirk vanished for a moment before she masked it again. "We don't need to show you anything tonight. I'm telling you face to face as a courtesy. You're expected to comply." Marcus looked past her. A couple of neighbors had come out of their homes, curious about the voices carrying across the street. A woman holding her dog's leash paused on the sidewalk, her eyes darting between Marcus and the self-proclaimed officials. Another neighbor, an older man in a baseball cap, leaned against his mailbox, watching closely. Marcus squared his shoulders. "With all due respect, Mrs. Sorensen, courtesy doesn't involve showing up at my door with 2 fake cops and threatening my family." Her lips tightened.
"Fake? Are you calling me a liar?"
"I'm calling this what it looks like," Marcus said. "Harassment." The taller enforcer muttered, "Watch your tone, sir." But Marcus didn't flinch. His daughter's small footsteps moved upstairs, and he felt the weight of protecting her more than ever. He raised his voice enough for the gathering neighbors to hear. "If you have an issue with me, bring official documents. Until then, you're trespassing on my property." The air grew thick. The men shifted, clearly surprised by his pushback. Linda crossed her arms tighter, her face flushed with irritation. "Fine," she spat. "If you want to make this difficult, we'll escalate. Don't say I didn't warn you. The community deserves better." Marcus locked eyes with her. "The community deserves fairness. And right now you're showing neither." A murmur spread through the small crowd now gathered. People whispered to each other, sensing something off. Some pulled out phones, cameras quietly raised. Linda seemed to notice and adjusted her tone, though her frustration boiled just beneath the surface. "Think carefully, Mr. Johnson. This neighborhood doesn't tolerate troublemakers." Marcus gripped the edge of the door, his knuckles white. He could feel the story spinning beyond a simple disagreement, and deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. But just as Linda didn't move from the porch, her chin lifted slightly, the way someone does when they want to remind you who's in charge, the 2 men flanked her, their presence heavy and deliberate. Marcus stayed in the doorway, refusing to give them the satisfaction of stepping back. "Since you want everything in writing," Linda began, her voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "I'll spell it out. You painted your shutters without approval. That's violation number 1. You've left trash bins visible from the street. That's violation number 2. And number 3, she dragged out the pause, her eyes flicking toward the crowd. Your family's gatherings bring too much traffic into this community. This neighborhood was built for peace and order, not disruptions. Marcus's brows shot up. Painted shutters? Those shutters were the same color when we moved in. Trash bins? Everyone puts their bins by the garage before pickup day. And as for traffic, my sister came over twice last month. Twice, that's your evidence? One of the enforcers grunted. Doesn't matter. If she says it's a violation, it's a violation. Marcus turned toward him. And who exactly are you? What authority do you have here? The man shifted his stance but didn't answer. His silence spoke louder than any excuse could. Linda cut in quickly. Mr. Johnson, these officers are contracted through the HOA. Their job is to make sure rules are followed. You can argue all you want, but the rules don't bend for anyone, not even you. Marcus clenched his jaw. Then let me see the contract. Let me see your bylaws. You don't show up at someone's door with threats and vague accusations and expect them to just roll over. By now, the neighbor with the dog had stepped closer, tugging her golden retriever along as if the show was too compelling to ignore. The man by the mailbox shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving the so-called officers. A teenager across the street started recording on his phone. Marcus noticed all of it, and so did Linda. Her voice tightened. Look, you might think you can talk your way out of this, but this community doesn't run on feelings. It runs on order. If you can't handle the standards, maybe this isn't the right place for your family. The words hung in the air. Some neighbors exchanged quick glances, whispers darting between them. Marcus could hear the weight of her message, the edge behind it. He leaned against the doorframe, refusing to break eye contact. My family has just as much right to be here as anyone else. We worked for this home. We pay the same dues as everyone else. What you're doing right now, it's harassment dressed up as authority. The enforcer on the left stepped closer, his boots hitting the concrete with force. You better lower your tone, sir. We're not here to debate. We're here to enforce. Marcus looked down at the man's jacket again. Still no badge, no patch, just a stitched word. Security. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Enforce what? The way you're standing on my porch without a single piece of identification? You think intimidation is the same thing as law? The crowd murmured again. Linda raised her hand sharply, silencing the men beside her. Fine. You want to play lawyer? We'll play. I'll put in for a fine. Multiple fines, in fact. Enough to push you into default. Once you're behind, we can move for lien, foreclosure if necessary. It won't be quick, but it'll be effective. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. She wasn't bluffing, at least not entirely. HOAs had ways of making life miserable, but the fury in her voice wasn't about rules, it was about control. Do you hear yourself? Marcus said quietly, his tone low but steady. You're threatening to take away a family's home over shutters and trash bins. That's not protecting the community, that's abuse. The older man by the mailbox finally spoke, his voice gravelly. Linda, that sounds extreme. Maybe this ain't the way to handle it. Her head snapped toward him. Stay out of this, Harold. You don't know the details. I know enough to smell something wrong, Harold replied, crossing his arms. The dog walker spoke next. I've never heard a single complaint about this family. Their daughter plays with my niece. They've never been disruptive. Linda's face flushed red, her authority slipping as the crowd began to side with Marcus. She gestured quickly to the enforcers. We're done here. He's been warned. Don't think this is over, Mr. Johnson. But Marcus didn't flinch. I'm not going anywhere, not until you bring actual proof. The tension thickened, neighbors shifting, phones still recording. Linda turned sharply on her heel, her heels clicking against the pavement as she stormed off the porch. The enforcers trailed behind, their expressions hard but unsure. Marcus stood in the doorway, his pulse hammering. He knew this wasn't finished. Linda wasn't the type to back down. But as the small crowd lingered, the whispers grew louder, and Marcus realized this fight wasn't just between him and the HOA president. It was about to pull the whole neighborhood into the spotlight. The porch light cast a yellow glow across the driveway. But it wasn't just the Johnsons and Linda anymore. By now, at least a dozen neighbors had stepped outside, drawn by the noise. Some stood on their lawns. Others leaned against cars parked along the curb. A few quietly raised their phones, recording what was quickly turning from a private HOA matter into neighborhood theater. Marcus stayed planted in the doorway, his body angled so that the crowd could see his face as well as Linda's. He knew witnesses mattered. Linda, however, didn't seem to notice, or maybe she didn't care. She turned sharply, heels digging into the concrete, and faced the onlookers. "Everyone here should understand something," she declared. "I take my role as president very seriously. This family has ignored multiple rules. If they're allowed to continue, what's next? Loud parties, overgrown lawns, cars on the street. One standard slip, the whole community suffers." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded absently, but more looked skeptical. Marcus let out a breath. "If you've really sent warnings, show them. Produce the letters, the fines, the paperwork, because I've seen nothing. Not a single notice in my mailbox or email, nothing on record." "Paperwork doesn't change the fact that you're in violation," Linda shot back, her words sharp and rehearsed. From the edge of the street, Harold spoke again. "Linda, you know how this looks, right? Folks recording, neighbors watching, you don't got nothing in your hands but words." The dog walker, Teresa, chimed in. "And why did you bring them?" She gestured at the two so-called enforcers. "We've never had security at our doors before. Why tonight?" The taller enforcer shifted uncomfortably. His partner adjusted his jacket like he wanted to disappear. Linda snapped back. "Because sometimes people need to be reminded that rules exist for a reason." Marcus shook his head. "No, you brought them here to scare me, to scare my family." His voice carried enough that the whole street heard him. But intimidation isn't going to work. A teenager across the street, still holding his phone steady, called out, "Yeah, this is messed up." His voice cracked but carried a note of defiance that made others glance around, emboldened. Linda's composure started to fray. "You people don't understand what's at stake here. Property values are fragile. One wrong family and the neighborhood reputation is ruined." Marcus felt the words slam against him like a blunt weapon. He looked at her squarely. "Say what you mean. Don't hide it behind talk about reputation." Gasps broke out in the crowd. A couple exchanged uneasy glances. The enforcers shuffled again, eyes darting to the growing audience. Linda's lips pressed into a tight line. For the first time that evening, she seemed unsure of herself. Harold stepped forward a little. "Linda, I've lived here 30 years. We've had all kinds of families come through. Never once have I seen a president show up with fake cops at someone's door. You're crossing a line," the dog barked suddenly, breaking the tension for a second, but Teresa pulled it close and muttered, "This isn't right." Marcus felt a surge of both anger and relief. People were seeing it. They weren't just going to let this slide. Linda, though, wasn't done. She jabbed her finger toward Marcus. "Don't think your little audience here is going to save you. I'll file every violation I can find. I'll make sure you regret disrespecting me and this board." Marcus stepped off the threshold, now standing fully on the porch, only a couple of feet from her. His voice was steady, but there was steel underneath. "You don't scare me, and you don't scare my family. You want to play this game? Then bring real proof. Until then, leave us alone." The crowd shifted closer now, like they were forming an invisible wall behind him. Phones angled higher. The energy of the street had changed. Less curiosity, more solidarity. One of the enforcers muttered under his breath, "This isn't worth it." But Linda hissed at him to stay quiet. Her eyes swept the neighbors. "Don't be fooled. This is how communities fall apart, when rules are ignored and leadership isn't respected." But the words didn't land the way she wanted. Instead, whispers spread again, louder this time. People weren't nodding in agreement. They were shaking their heads. Teresa's voice rang out clear. "Leadership isn't about scaring families out of their homes, it's about fairness." The air was thick with tension, but Marcus could feel momentum shifting. He wasn't standing alone anymore. But just as the pressure seemed to peak, headlights swung into the street, an SUV pulling up slowly. And in that moment, everything about the confrontation was about to change. The headlights cut across the street like a stage light, making everyone glance over. A dark blue SUV rolled to a stop just a few houses down. The door opened and out stepped Danielle Johnson, still in her Navy uniform, her hair pinned tight from a long shift. She'd planned to come home quietly, hug her daughter, and rest. Instead, she froze at the sight of a small crowd gathered at her driveway. Marcus felt his chest loosen at the sight of her, relief mixed with worry. He knew Danielle didn't like theatrics, but this was no ordinary night. The crowd parted slightly as Danielle walked forward, her boots clicking against the pavement. She didn't say anything at first. She didn't need to. The uniform spoke louder than words. Neighbors shifted, whispers spreading like sparks on dry grass. Linda's lips twitched into a tight smile, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. She adjusted her blazer and spoke louder than necessary, as if to remind everyone she was still in control. "Mrs. Johnson, I was just explaining to your husband that your family has ignored several HOA violations. We're working to maintain order in this community." Danielle's gaze moved from Linda to the two men standing stiff at her side. "And who are they?" Her voice was calm, low, but it carried across the driveway with unmistakable authority. "They're contracted security," Linda answered quickly. "Here to enforce rules." Danielle took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. "Then they should have badges, identification, credentials. Do you gentlemen have any of those?" The shorter enforcer cleared his throat but didn't speak. The taller one shifted again, muttering something about just following orders. Danielle's lips pressed together. "I've served this country for 18 years. I know what real authority looks like, and this," she gestured toward the two men, "this isn't it." The crowd murmured louder. Phones zoomed in. Teresa whispered something to Harold, who nodded gravely. Linda lifted her chin, refusing to back down. "Mrs. Johnson, this uniform of yours doesn't excuse your family from following rules. Your shutters, your trash bins, the noise." Danielle's voice sliced through Linda's sentence like a blade. She took another step forward, closing the space between them. "Don't insult me with excuses about shutters and trash bins. My husband just told you, no letters, no notices, no official record. You're on our property making threats, and you brought backup without authority." Linda's cheeks burned. "I don't need to explain myself to you." "Yes, you do," Danielle shot back. "Because you came here with accusations and no proof, and now you're being recorded by half the neighborhood." The teen holding his phone raised it higher, almost proudly. The taller enforcer muttered again, his voice cracking this time. "This doesn't feel right." Linda spun on him, whispering something harsh, but Danielle cut her off. "If you don't have identification, you leave now. That's how the law works. Trespassing is a serious matter. I can call Plano PD right now and let them sort this out." The shorter enforcer raised both hands slightly, his voice shaky. "Ma'am, we're just here because she told us to come." "And who is she to order you?" Danielle pressed. "She's not law enforcement. She's not military. She's a homeowner with a title that doesn't give her the right to send you to people's doors." The words landed hard. The crowd buzzed with agreement, a few people even clapping quietly. Linda's face twisted. "You think you're clever? You think this uniform makes you untouchable? But rules are rules. You can't bully your way out of accountability." Danielle straightened her shoulders, squared. "This uniform isn't about being untouchable. It's about standing up for what's right. And tonight, what's happening here isn't right." Marcus finally spoke again, his voice calmer now, steadier. "We pay our dues. We follow the rules. If you have proof otherwise, bring it. But don't ever come to my house again with threats and fake muscle." The enforcers looked at each other, then back at Linda. Their confidence had drained. Without proof, without authority, they were just two men in jackets. Linda's eyes darted around the crowd. For the first time, she seemed aware of how many people were against her. But she refused to step down. "This isn't over," she snapped. "I'll file the paperwork tomorrow. I'll bring the board into this, and when the fines pile up, don't say I didn't warn you." Danielle didn't flinch. She tilted her head slightly, her voice firm but controlled. "Bring whatever paperwork you want. We'll be ready. But next time you come without these men, and you come with actual evidence." A ripple of agreement spread through the crowd. Someone muttered, "She's right," loud enough for Linda to hear. Linda glared at Marcus, then at Danielle, her face twisted in frustration. The power she thought she held was slipping away, and everyone could see it. But before she could retreat and lick her wounds, Danielle took one last step forward, ready to expose exactly how fragile Linda's so-called authority really was. The driveway had turned into a stage. Neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder now, whispering, pointing, filming, while the Johnsons faced Linda and her two so-called enforcers. Every second stretched like the entire block was waiting to see who would crack first. Danielle stood tall, the faint streetlight glinting off the pins on her navy uniform. She hadn't raised her voice, but she didn't need to. Authority radiated from her posture, the calm way she asked questions, the way she looked straight into people's eyes. It was a presence Linda couldn't match. "Gentlemen," Danielle said again, her tone firm but not angry. "Show me your IDs. If you're really contracted security, you'll have credentials. And if you don't, you're trespassing, plain and simple." The taller man shifted, pulling at his jacket. His partner glanced nervously at the phones pointed at them. Finally, the shorter one spoke up. "Ma'am, we don't carry IDs. She just told us it was neighborhood enforcement, that's all." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone in the back muttered, "Knew it." Danielle's expression didn't change, but her voice carried like steel. "So, you're admitting you're not licensed security? You're just here on her word?" The taller man finally broke. "Look, we were just asked to stand here, look official, that's it." His voice cracked under the weight of the crowd's eyes. Linda spun on them, her voice rising. "Quiet, both of you. You're making this worse." Marcus stepped forward, crossing his arms. "No, they're making it clear you brought 2 men to my home to scare us, and they've just admitted they don't have a shred of authority." Teresa, the woman with the dog, raised her phone higher. "Got it all on video." Linda's face reddened. "This is harassment against me now. I'm trying to do my duty as HOA president, and you people are twisting everything." Danielle's eyes narrowed slightly. "Harassment is what you did tonight. Coming onto our property, threatening foreclosure without proof, parading these men around as if they had power. That isn't leadership, that's intimidation." The crowd murmured louder, a swell of agreement washing over the Johnsons. Harold, the older man, stepped closer to the porch. "Linda, I've backed you in meetings before, but this ain't how business is done. Folks don't want bullies running this neighborhood. They want fairness." Linda pointed a trembling finger at him. "You don't know the pressure I'm under. Property values are everything. One wrong move in this neighborhood." "Property values don't give you the right to target people," Danielle cut in, her voice sharp enough to silence Linda mid-sentence. "This isn't about grass or shutters. Everyone here can see that. This is about who you think belongs and who doesn't." Silence fell. That truth hit harder than any threat. The enforcers looked ready to leave, shifting awkwardly as the weight of the crowd pressed down on them. Finally, the shorter one muttered, "We're done here," and started stepping back toward the street. His partner followed, their shoulders slumping under the shame of being exposed. Linda's eyes darted frantically, searching for a way to claw back control, but the neighbors weren't on her side anymore. Marcus's voice was steady now, fueled by the support around him. "You can file your paperwork, you can send your letters, but from now on, everything you try will be met with transparency. No more intimidation behind closed doors." Phones lowered only slightly, still aimed, still recording. The community had shifted. The balance of power wasn't in Linda's hands anymore. It was in the eyes of every neighbor who saw her tactics laid bare. Danielle stepped closer, her presence unshakable. "Go home, Mrs. Sorensen. Tonight you lost more than an argument. You lost the trust of the people you claim to represent." For the first time all evening, Linda faltered. Her eyes darted, her breath quickened, and without another word she turned sharply and started down the driveway. Some neighbors exchanged glances. Others whispered. The tension didn't vanish, but something new replaced it. Solidarity. Marcus exhaled, finally turning to Danielle. "You came home just in time." Danielle placed a hand on his arm, her voice soft but certain. "We'll handle this together." Their daughter peered from the upstairs window, small fingers pressed against the glass, watching her parents stand firm while the neighborhood witnessed it all. But while Linda walked away into the dark, her heels clicking against the pavement, everyone knew this confrontation wasn't finished. It was only moving to a bigger stage. For a long moment, the neighborhood felt frozen in the aftershock of Linda's retreat. Her heels had barely disappeared down the block when conversations broke open across the crowd. Some neighbors whispered in disbelief, others shook their heads, and a few stepped closer to Marcus and Danielle, like they wanted to show solidarity. Harold spoke first, his gravelly voice cutting through the chatter. "I don't like trouble, but I'll tell you this. She went too far tonight, threatening foreclosure without a single piece of proof, bringing along 2 men who admitted they ain't licensed. That's not leadership. That's desperation." Teresa nodded, her dog tugging at the leash impatiently. "She tried to make you an example. If nobody stood up, she would have done it to someone else next." Marcus looked around, his chest rising and falling. I appreciate all of you speaking up, but I'll be honest. This isn't just about me or my family. If she thinks she can abuse her role like this, then no one's safe. Danielle stood tall beside him, her uniform still crisp despite the long day. She turned slightly toward the crowd. He's right. Power without accountability is dangerous, and tonight we all saw how easily it can be misused. A man from across the street, wearing a Dallas Cowboys hoodie, raised his hand like he was in a town hall. What happens now? She's still HOA president. She still has the board behind her. Danielle's eyes locked on his. That depends on what we do. Above the law, they have bylaws, yes, but those bylaws are bound by state and federal law. You can't enforce rules without due process. You can't threaten foreclosure without proper notices, records, and votes. And you certainly can't send unlicensed men to intimidate families. Phones were still recording, but now neighbors lowered them slightly, listening like students in a classroom. Teresa asked, "So what can we do?" People talk big at meetings, but no one ever holds the board accountable. Danielle didn't hesitate. Start by demanding transparency. Ask for minutes from board meetings. Ask for budgets, expenditures, records of complaints. You have a legal right to those. And if you suspect misconduct, you document it. The Cowboys fan nodded slowly as though connecting dots in his mind. So if she tries this again, Marcus cut in, then we don't let her do it quietly. Tonight proved something. When people watch, she backs down. The teenager who'd been recording grinned. I'm uploading this. Folks need to see what happened. No one's going to believe it otherwise. A ripple of agreement moved through the group. Danielle stepped forward again, her voice calm but firm, directed at the neighbors but meant for anyone who might still be listening in the shadows. Leadership is supposed to protect, not threaten. Rules are supposed to keep things fair, not give one person power to decide who belongs. If we don't push back, she'll keep crossing lines. Silence hung for a beat, and then Harold said, "Well, I'm with you. She's been running this HOA like it's her personal empire. Maybe it's time someone reminded her she ain't the law." A murmur of agreement followed. Marcus felt the tightness in his chest ease just a little. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was resistance, and people were standing with them. From the corner of the group, another voice spoke. It was a woman named Lillian who'd been silent until now. She clutched her phone close but spoke with quiet conviction. "She's already sent me warnings about my front porch plants. Said they didn't fit community guidelines. I never argued because I didn't want trouble. But maybe I should have." Danielle turned to her. "You're not alone, and that's the point. When people act alone, intimidation works. But when we stand together, intimidation crumbles." Marcus glanced at his wife, pride swelling in his chest. She hadn't come home expecting to be a voice for the entire block, but here she was, calm, commanding, unwavering. The crowd buzzed again, voices rising and falling, neighbors sharing their own grievances. A picture was forming. Linda's leadership wasn't built on respect. It was built on fear. Danielle raised her hand slightly and the noise died down. This doesn't end tonight. Tomorrow she'll try again, probably with paperwork and technicalities. But remember this. Rules without fairness are just tools of control. Don't let her rewrite what community means. The crowd seemed to take those words in, the tension in the air transforming into something heavier but steadier. Harold adjusted his cap. "If she tries another stunt, you can count on me being there. Ain't gonna let this neighborhood turn into a circus." Teresa smiled faintly. "Same here." Even the teenager added, "This video's not just for clicks." But as supportive as the neighbors seemed, Marcus knew Linda wasn't the type to lick her wounds quietly. She'd come back harder, and the next round wouldn't be on the front porch. The crowd hadn't dispersed even after Linda stormed off. Her shadow lingered in every conversation. Neighbors clustered in small groups on the sidewalks, whispering, speculating, replaying what they had just witnessed. But all eyes kept drifting back to the two men in black jackets who hadn't left. They stood a little apart now, the tall one leaning against the fence, the shorter one looking at the ground. Their earlier bravado had evaporated. Without Linda barking orders, they looked less like enforcers and more like two guys who'd just been caught sneaking into the wrong room. Danielle spotted them and stepped closer, her boots steady against the pavement. "You two haven't left yet," she said firmly. "So let's clear the air. Who exactly hired you? What's your real job?" The tall one rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes darting nervously toward the cluster of neighbors filming every word. "Look, it's not what you think. We're not real security." The shorter one finally looked up. guilt written all over his face. We do odd jobs. Maintenance, deliveries, sometimes temp work. She paid us cash to stand here and look intimidating. A collective gasp moved through the crowd. Harold let out a low whistle. Teresa shook her head in disbelief. Someone muttered, "Knew it," while another neighbor whispered, "This is worse than I thought." Marcus crossed his arms, his voice calm but edged with frustration. "So you were pretending to be law enforcement? Pretending to have authority?" The shorter man swallowed hard. "She said we didn't need to say anything, just stand there, keep straight faces, make it look official." Danielle's eyes narrowed. "You realize that's impersonation? You put yourselves at risk, and worse, you let her use you to harass a family in their own home." The tall one tried to defend himself, his tone shaky. "We didn't know it would get this far. We thought it was just, HOA stuff." She made it sound like a regular job. The teenager with the phone laughed bitterly. "Joey doesn't hire fake cops, man. Everyone knows that." Lillian, still clutching her phone, stepped forward. "This is fraud. She misled you, and she misled us. If she's willing to stage intimidation with fake security, what else has she been lying about?" The two men shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, they weren't the threat. They were part of the evidence. Danielle's tone softened, though it stayed firm. "You both need to think carefully about the choices you make tonight. You helped someone abuse power. People here could have gotten hurt. If you're smart, you'll put this on record before she tries to spin it her way." The tall one nodded faintly, guilt etched into his features. "We'll talk. We don't want trouble with the law." "We didn't sign up for this," Harold grunted. "Too late for that, trouble's already here." Phones tilted, recording their every word. The neighborhood had become its own courtroom, and the two men were cornered by truth. Marcus finally spoke, his tone even but heavy with meaning. "Go home, think about what you've done. And next time someone asks you to intimidate a family for cash, maybe ask yourself if it's worth it." The shorter one muttered, "It's not," before tugging at his partner's sleeve. Together they shuffled down the street, disappearing into the shadows where Linda had vanished earlier. The air felt different after they left, heavier but clearer too. The enforcers had been unmasked. Their admission was raw and public. The illusion of authority was shattered. Neighbors gathered closer to the Johnsons now, voices overlapping. "Can you believe that? She paid them in cash. This is going to blow up." Teresa's dog barked once, as if punctuating the chaos. She pulled the leash tight and said, "I'm done giving her the benefit of the doubt. If she's staging fake security, then she's not fit to lead anything." Danielle exhaled slowly, her hand brushing Marcus's. "It's not just about her anymore. It's about the way power can be twisted, and tonight people saw it for what it is." Harold adjusted his cap. "You've got witnesses now. You've got proof. Whatever she tries next, she can't hide behind her title." The teenager waved his phone like a trophy. "I got it all on video. No way she walks away clean after this." Marcus nodded, though unease still pressed at his chest. "She's not going to give up. People like her never just walk away." Danielle's eyes hardened, her voice steady as stone. "Then we'll be ready. We're not alone anymore. The truth is out." The neighbors stood silently with them for a moment, the quiet charged with something stronger than fear, unity. But as the crowd began to break apart, heading back to their homes, Marcus knew deep down that Linda wasn't finished. She'd regroup, and the next move would be even more dangerous. The other board members shifted again, caught in the crossfire of truth. One of them, a woman in a navy blouse, cleared her throat. Perhaps the neighborhood began to thin out as the night wore on, but no one forgot what they had just witnessed. Even as porch lights clicked off and front doors closed, conversations hummed behind walls and curtains. By morning, it was all anyone in the subdivision was talking about. Linda Sorensen, the HOA president, hiring fake security to strong-arm the Johnson family. The next day, Marcus and Danielle sat at their kitchen table. A stack of envelopes sat unopened by the fruit bowl, but neither of them reached for them. Instead, Danielle stared at her coffee, her uniform folded neatly over the back of a chair. "She's not going to let this go," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "No," Danielle agreed, "but she's lost control of the story. Everyone saw what happened. She doesn't get to twist it in private anymore." Their daughter padded into the kitchen in her socks, sensing the tension but too young to understand the weight behind it. Marcus kissed her forehead and walked her toward the living room. He didn't want her caught in the middle of what came next. By mid-morning, Harold knocked on their door.
He held a folded sheet of paper in his hand.
"You two need to see this," he said, his voice low. Marcus unfolded the paper. It was a notice, typed and stamped with the HOA's letterhead, stating that the Johnsons were being fined for violations of property standards. The charges: improper paint color, improper storage of waste bins, and excessive visitor traffic. Each carried a fine of $250. "She wasted no time," Marcus muttered. Harold shook his head. "She slipped it into my mailbox by mistake, probably rushing to get them out before anyone else could think twice." Danielle's jaw tightened. "She's doubling down. Instead of apologizing, she's making it official." Harold leaned against the doorframe. "Problem is, most of the board doesn't even know about this yet. She's trying to ram it through before anyone asks questions." Danielle stood, sliding the notice across the table. "Then it's time to bring the board into it. If she wants this fight, she's going to have it in the open." Later that evening, the HOA's scheduled board meeting packed the community center more than it ever had before. Folding chairs scraped against the floor as residents filed in, whispering, eyes darting toward the front of the room where Linda sat stiffly at the table. Her blazer was pressed, her hair neat, but her smile looked forced, stretched too thin. Beside her sat 3 other board members, neighbors who had kept quiet for years, more comfortable rubber-stamping her decisions than challenging them. But tonight even they looked uneasy. Danielle and Marcus entered together, their presence drawing murmurs. Harold, Teresa, Lillian, and half the street followed, filling the back rows. The teenager with the video sat front and center, phone in hand, ready to capture more. Linda rapped her gavel against the table. "This meeting will come to order. Tonight we're addressing violations of property standards and necessary enforcement to maintain our community's reputation." Her voice wavered just slightly, but she pushed forward. "As president, I issued fines against the Johnson family for repeated infractions." Murmurs rose immediately. Teresa raised her hand without waiting to be called. "You mean the same family you showed up at last night with fake security?" Gasps and scattered laughter broke through the room. Linda slammed the gavel again. "Order!" Danielle rose to her feet, her presence commanding even without the uniform. "This isn't about order. This is about abuse of power. Last night, in front of half this neighborhood, you showed up at my door with 2 men who admitted they weren't licensed. You threatened foreclosure without proof, and now you expect us to believe these fines are legitimate?" The room erupted, voices overlapping, some residents shouting in agreement, others demanding explanations. The board members shifted uncomfortably, their eyes avoiding Linda's. Linda gripped the gavel tighter. "These are violations. They're on record." Marcus spoke from his seat. "Then show us the record. Show us the notices you claim you sent. Show us the documentation. Because as of today, my family hasn't received a single letter. Not until Harold brought us this slip, you tried to sneak into his mailbox." Lillian stood. "She did the same thing to me. Claimed my plants weren't approved. I paid the fine because I was scared, but I never saw paperwork either." The room swelled with voices. "She fined me for my car. She said my fence was too high. I thought I was the only one." The air turned electric. One by one, neighbors realized the pattern. It wasn't about rules, it was about control. Danielle's voice rose above the noise. "Leadership without fairness isn't leadership, it's dictatorship. And if this board allows it to continue, you're complicit." The board meeting had ended in chaos, but the fallout rippled through the neighborhood long after the chairs were stacked and the doors locked. Word spread faster than Linda could control. By the following morning, posts appeared on the neighborhood's Facebook group. Clips from the teenager's video made their way onto social media, shared and reshared with captions like, "HOA, president caught with fake security and neighbors stand up to intimidation." Marcus scrolled through some of the comments at the kitchen table, his daughter crunching cereal beside him. "People are watching from outside the neighborhood now," he murmured. "Folks from Dallas, Fort Worth, even further." Danielle sipped her coffee, calm but focused. "That's good. The more eyes, the harder it is for her to twist the story." But it wasn't just strangers online who paid attention. By noon, Harold knocked again, this time with 2 other neighbors at his side, their faces carrying determination. "We've been talking," Harold said. "This isn't just about what happened to you. A lot of us have stories, fines we couldn't prove, threats that never made sense. We let her get away with too much." One of the neighbors, a middle-aged man named Chris, added, "She fined me for having my pickup parked on the street overnight. Said it lowered property values. I paid it just to avoid the fight, but after last night I regret staying quiet. Danielle gestured them inside. The living room filled quickly. Lillian arrived a few minutes later holding a folder. She spread out copies of old notices, each one vague and lacking signatures. This is what she sent me last year. I kept everything, thought it was strange, but I didn't want to stir trouble. Marcus looked at the pile of papers, his jaw tightening. This is a pattern. She's been using her position to threaten people, knowing most wouldn't question her. Danielle nodded slowly. Patterns matter. If enough of us bring this forward, the board will have no choice but to investigate. Teresa arrived next, dog leash wrapped around her wrist, her phone in hand. Petition, she said plainly. If we gather enough signatures, we can force a vote to remove her. It's in the bylaws. The room buzzed with agreement. Neighbors leaned forward, tossing out their own experiences, their own frustrations. For the first time, people weren't just whispering. They were planning. Marcus raised a hand. If we do this, we need to do it right. Everything documented. Every story written down. Every signature verified. She'll fight dirty, so we can't give her any openings. The teenager popped his head in from the doorway. He had been hovering outside. I can help with video. Put together clips that show everything. People need to see the whole picture. Danielle smiled faintly. Looks like everyone has a role to play. Over the next hour, the Johnsons' living room transformed into a war room. Laptops opened, papers spread across the coffee table. Neighbors trading stories while their children played in the background. There was a strange sense of relief, like the fear that had hung over them was finally breaking. At one point, Lillian leaned back in her chair, her voice soft. It's crazy, isn't it? One person with a title can make so many people feel powerless. And yet all it took was one moment. One family saying no for everyone else to remember their own strength. Danielle looked at her, the words resonating deeply. That's how it always works. Power only lasts if people accept it. Once you stand together, intimidation doesn't stand a chance. Marcus squeezed her hand gently, pride flickering in his eyes. By late afternoon, petitions were drafted. Harold volunteered to go door to door. Teresa agreed to manage the online version. Chris promised to talk to every homeowner on his street. A movement had started, right there in the Johnsons' living room. As the neighbors filtered out, Danielle stood by the window watching them scatter across the block, their shoulders straighter than the night before. She felt the shift in the air, not just relief, but resolve. Marcus joined her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. You think she knows what's coming? Danielle exhaled slowly. She'll feel it soon enough. But don't underestimate her. People who cling to power don't let go quietly. Outside, porch lights flicked on as the sun dipped low, casting the street in warm hues. Children laughed in yards, dogs barked, neighbors waved to one another. For the first time in months, the community felt like a community again. But Danielle's gaze lingered on the far end of the street, where Linda's house stood dark and silent. No one had seen her since the board meeting. But silence from someone like Linda wasn't peace, it was preparation. And Danielle knew the real test was still ahead. 2 days later, the neighborhood gathered once again, this time not in chaos, not on a doorstep, but in the community park at the center of their subdivision. Folding chairs were scattered around under the shade of oak trees, picnic tables filled with stacks of petitions, and neighbors talked in small groups with a kind of energy Marcus had never seen before. The Johnsons arrived together, hand in hand with their daughter, who clutched a juice box and looked around curiously. Marcus carried a clipboard full of signatures. Danielle, in plain clothes now, had that same steady presence that had carried them through the fire. As they approached the crowd, Harold waved them over. We've got enough, he said proudly. Between the paper signatures and the online ones, more than 2/3 of the homeowners signed. That's enough to call for a recall vote. Cheers erupted from the small circle of neighbors who overheard. Teresa let out a short laugh, tugging her golden retriever close. I never thought I'd see the day people actually standing up. But even as the mood lifted, the tension wasn't gone. From across the park, Linda appeared. She walked quickly, her blazer pulled tight, her eyes sharp. For a moment, the conversations dimmed as everyone watched her approach. She stopped in front of the picnic tables, her voice loud and cutting. You think you can tear me down with gossip and lies? You think signatures on a piece of paper erase the fact that this community needs order? Murmurs swept through the group, but no one shouted back. Instead, they waited. Danielle stepped forward, her voice even. Order isn't built on fear, Linda. It's built on trust, and you lost that the night you tried to bully us into leaving our home. Linda scoffed. I was protecting property values. That's my responsibility. Marcus raised his clipboard. No. Your responsibility was to serve the people here, not lord over them. And now the people have spoken. He handed the clipboard to Harold, who placed it firmly on the table for everyone to see. The crowd shifted, neighbors nodding, some clapping quietly. The balance of power was no longer in Linda's hands, it was in theirs. Her face tightened. You'll regret this. Without rules, this place will fall apart. Lillian's voice rose from the crowd, clear and steady. We're not against rules, we're against abuse. And that's what you brought here. The applause swelled louder this time. Even the teenager with the phone still recording called out, You're done, Linda. For a moment, Linda looked like she might lash out again. Her fists clenched at her sides, her face red. But then she saw the eyes fixed on her, the phones raised, the petitions signed, the neighbors united. And in that moment, the fight drained out of her. She turned sharply and walked away, her heels sinking slightly into the grass as she disappeared down the path. Silence followed her exit. But it wasn't the tense silence of before. It was relief, the kind that settles deep like a weight finally lifted. Danielle looked around the circle of faces. This isn't about one family, it's about all of us. If we don't hold leaders accountable, power will always find ways to be misused. What happened to us could have happened to any of you. That's why this matters. Harold raised his cap, his voice warm. Community ain't about fences and shutters, it's about standing together when it counts. Neighbors nodded. Some clapped again, and Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. He looked at Danielle, pride swelling in his chest. Their daughter tugged at his sleeve and whispered, Did we win? Marcus crouched down, his hand brushing her hair. We stood up for what's right, that's the real win. The park buzzed with quiet conversations. Neighbors lingered longer than they had in months. Strangers shook hands. Old friends reconnected. And for once, people weren't afraid of speaking their minds. As the sun dipped low, painting the Texas sky in streaks of orange and pink, Danielle turned to Marcus and spoke softly. This will pass, but the lesson has to stay. He nodded. That power means nothing if it isn't fair. And as they walked home together, surrounded by neighbors who no longer felt like strangers, the Johnsons knew the battle had left behind more than conflict. It had left a message that would echo through the streets for years to come. Because in the end, the strength of a community isn't measured by rules or titles. It's measured by the courage of the people who refuse to be silenced. If you believe in standing up for fairness and accountability, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. Together, we can keep these conversations alive.